be covering the last 6 pages of the Red Book today. So it's going to be a rock'em sock'em session. There's a lot of meat in this. And just for those of you who are regular followers of this channel, uh, let me just remind you that next week we will not have a class. I have an out-of-town guest, and I have to stand tall for that with my wife. But 2 weeks from today, we will begin to read um, the article by Thomas Arst, which is from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. And this is a series that was Thomas Arst's idea. It's also edited by Mary Stein, who's one of the most famous Jungian analysts in the world, who lives now in Switzerland. But Thomas was became a friend of mine over time after this uh, series began to be published, and it was a very sad fact when Thomas died in 2020 on Easter Sunday, probably one of the first deaths from COVID at age 65. So I was so sorry personally to lose Thomas because he had invited me to the Aranos uh, conference that spring, and I had paid my money and um, was planning to go about 4 weeks later. And unfortunately, Thomas died, and then the event had to be canceled because of the beginnings of COVID. So, anyway, Thomas Arst was a brilliant man. He had a PhD in physics, believe it or not, I think from Princeton. And uh, he had been churning on Jung's Red Book for years, and he had been thinking about Jung's oeuvre for years. And so um, he met with Murray Stein in, I would say, about 2017. There's a interview with Murray about that. And over lunch, he persuaded Murray to start this series. And at the time, they envisioned one book and about 30 essays. But once they got started, they realized that they had more essays submitted than one book. And ultimately, there became 5 volumes. Thomas, unfortunately, did not live to see the 5th volume. But Murray carried it through, and now I think there are about 70 essays in the 5 volumes. It's a very valuable set. You can purchase the entire set from Chiron Publications for about $140, or you can purchase the individual volumes. I'm not sure you can get the individual volumes from Chiron, but you can certainly from Amazon. And so State of Awakening is here. Good to see you. And let me just put a greeting in the chat uh, to show that I am here too. And okay, so I'm going to back up just a bit for context. So I'm going to back up to page 547, and I guess I should put it on the screen, right?
And what footnote starts at the bottom of
One
that page?
149.
Okay, got it. Which, so in the
Uh,
PDF, that will be page 358.
Right. And the footnote says the rest of this dialogue does not occur in Black Book 6. So Shamdasani found it somewhere else, and he he just put it in here. But nonetheless, it is relevant at this point in the text. So it's a valuable essay. I do believe it was by Jung himself, not Shamdasani's work. Um, and let's see what I
And
don't
like we
remember.
said last week,
What page are you on the electronic one?
358.
358. See if that puts me
And
in
like we
there.
said last week, it may have been shoved in on a piece of paper by
Right.
Jung or somewhere else where obviously it was a continuation of this text, but not written in sequence in the same place. So I would
Okay.
say a pretty apt observation, discovery, find from Shamdasani,
Yeah.
because um, if that footnote wouldn't have been there, I don't think I would have ever called it into question.
Okay. Three. That doesn't work for my version of the electronic version, but let me get to the
358
right.
scrutinies. Well, it'll be yeah,
Okay.
the page numbers.
I'm in scrutinies now, but I have to get to the sort of the end of it.
The sidebar page will be 389. The page number in the image is
No,
358.
I'm up to 430 already, and
So go back to 389.
no. That's not where it is. Mine goes up to 500. Uh, so I don't. You and I have different versions.
And
Um,
mine only goes up to 404.
yeah, I'm up to 444, and I just passed footnote 87 in scrutinies.
Oh, okay.
So I'm
So a
getting
different
there though.
size document.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Just a minute.
Well, that's
Um,
something. It's then PDF. There are multiple versions of who
okay,
and how. Was it pages or columns that were scanned,
I don't
which
know.
could be from different editions of the
Yeah,
text.
that's entirely possible. And so let me see where I can find this. I need to find a footnote. Okay, there's 150, zeroing in on it like the old artillery officer I am.
Kill everything on the way,
Uh, okay.
and then oh, target.
And okay, so what I'm going to start in is at 147, footnote 147. And let me just find this again and make sure I'm where I think I am. Um, oh, I'm sorry, it's 149 where I want to start. 149. Where is that? There it is. Um, all right, so I'm gonna start here. I'm gonna put it on the screen now so everybody can see it. Let me just also check what's going on the YouTube. All right, so good morning, everyone. We're gonna finish the Red Book today. And Jung has um, quite a punchline to the end of the book. I would call it that. And so I'm going to share it with you now electronically. So it's coming up, and uh, I'm gonna I'm gonna read from the last few
Oh yeah, that's the difference. Your Pete. I see your
paragraphs. Yeah, I'm at 458.
Yeah, your
And,
your your PDF has full pages per page. Mine has two columns per page.
okay. So, all right. So there had been a discussion where uh, Elijah Elijah and Salome are in uh, Jung's active imagination, and Elijah says a word about the death of God. There is only one God, and God cannot die. And now I'm going to skip ahead 2 pages. I'm on page 547 of the Reader's Edition, if you have that available to you. And I'm going to start, uh, let's see, where was it? Um, okay. Elijah suddenly replied, uh, I do not like this multiplicity. It is not easy to think it. And read it from one place here. Okay. And Salome says, the simple alone is pleasurable. One need not think about it. I replied, Elijah, you need not contemplate it at all. It is not to be thought. It is to be viewed. It is a painting. And to Salome, I said, Salome, it is not true that only the simple is pleasurable. Over time, it is even boring. In truth, the multiple captivates you. But Salome turned to Elijah and said, Father, it seems to me that men have outstripped us. It is right. The many is more pleasurable. The one is too simple and always the same. Elijah seemed saddened and said, what about the one in this case? Does the one still exist if it stands next to the many? I answered, that is your old ingrained mistake, that the one excludes the many. But there are many individual things. The multiplicity of individual things is the one multiple God, from whose body many gods arise. But the uniqueness of the one thing is the one God, is the other God, whose body is a man, but whose spirit is as large as the world. But Elijah shook his head and said, that is new, my son. Is the new good? What was is good. What was will be. Is that not the truth? Was there ever anything new? And was what you call new ever good? Everything remains the same if you give it a new name. There is nothing new. There can be nothing new. How could I then look, wait a minute, how could I then look ahead? I look at the past and therein I see the future as in a mirror. And I see that nothing new happens. Everything is but mere recurrence of what has been since time immemorial. What is your being? An appearance, a darting light. Tomorrow it is no longer true. It is gone. It is as if it never was. Come, Salome, let us go. One is mistaken in the world of men. Hold on just a minute. I need to. Salome, let us go. One is mistaken in the world of men. Please excuse this noise from my wife, which will end shortly. Okay, thank you. Okay. But Salome looked back and whispered to me while leaving. Being and multiplicity appeal to me, even if it is not new and not eternally true. Thus they disappeared into the dark night, and I returned to the burden signified by my existence. and I sought to do everything correctly that seemed to me to be a task, and to take every way that seemed to me to be necessary for myself. But my dreams became difficult and laden with anxiety, and I did not know why. One night, my soul suddenly came to me as if worried and said, "Listen to me. I am in a great torment. The son of the dark womb besieges me. Therefore, your dreams are also difficult, since you feel the torment of the depths, the pain of your soul, and the suffering of the gods." I answered, "Can I help? As if it, if, as it, or is it super, I'm sorry, or is it superfluous that a man elevates himself to being a mediator of the gods, of the gods? Or is it superfluous, I'm sorry, or is it superfluous that a man himself elevates himself to being a mediator of the gods? Is it presumption, or should a man become redeemer of the gods after men are saved through the divine mediator? You speak the truth, my soul replied. The gods need a human mediator and rescuer. With this, man paves the way to crossing over and to divinity. I gave you a frightening dream so that your face would turn to the gods. Let their torment reach you so that you would remember the suffering gods. You do too much for men, since they are the masters of your world. You can, in effect, help men only through the gods, not directly. Alleviate the burning torment of the gods. I asked her, "So tell me, where do I begin? I feel their torment and mine at the same time, and yet it is not mine, but real and unreal." "That is it, and this is where separation should occur," my soul replied. "But how? My wits fail me. You must know how." "Your wits fail quickly," she retorted, "but the gods need precisely your human wits. And I the wits of the gods," I added, "and thus we run aground." "No, you are too impatient. Only patient comparison provides a solution, not one side taking a quick decision. It requires work." I asked, "What do the gods suffer from?" "Well," my soul replied, "you have left them with torment, and since then they have suffered." "Rightly so," I cried. "They have tormented men enough. Now they should get a taste of it." She answered, "But what if the torment also reaches you? What have you gained then? You cannot leave all the suffering to the gods, or else they will draw you into their torment. After all, they possess the power to do so. To be sure, I must confess that men, too, possess a wondrous power over the gods through their wits." I answered, "I recognize that the torment of the gods reached me. Therefore, I also recognize that I must yield to the gods. What is their desire?" "They want obedience," she replied. "So be it," I answered, "but I fear their desire. Therefore I say, I want to do what I can. On no account will I take back onto myself all the torment that I had to leave to the gods. Not even Christ took torment away from his followers, but rather he heaped it on. I reserve conditions for myself. The gods should recognize this and direct their desire accordingly. There is no longer any unconditional obedience, since man has stopped being a slave to the gods. He has dignity before the gods. He is a limb that even the gods cannot do without. Giving way before the gods is no more. So let their wish be heard. Comparison shall accomplish the rest, so that each will have his appropriate part. My soul answered, "The gods want you to do their sake what you know you do not want to do. The gods want you to do for their sake what you know you do not want to do." "I thought so," I exclaimed. "Of course, that is what the gods want. But do the gods also do what I want? I want the fruits of my labor. What do the gods do for me? They want their goals to be fulfilled, but what about mine? This infuriated my soul, and she said, "You're an unbelievably defiant and rebellious. You are unbelievably defiant and rebellious. Consider the fact that the gods are strong." I replied, "But I know," I replied, "but no longer is there any unconditional obedience. When will they use their strength for me? They also want me to place mine at their service. What is their payment in kind? That they are tormented? Man suffered agony, and the were still not satisfied, but remained insatiable in their devising of new torments. They allowed men to become so blinded that he believed that there were no gods and that there was only one God who was a loving father. So that today, someone who struggles with the gods is even thought to be crazy. They have thus prepared this shame too. They have thus prepared this shame too for those who recognize them. Out of the boundless greed of power, since leading the blind is not easy, they will corrupt even their slaves. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a minute, Jordan, and give you a chance to comment.
So, to me, two pivotal pieces here that Jung is cracking open the egg, so to speak, where they're, where's this paragraph? So, therefore, your dreams are also difficult, since you feel the torment of the depths, the pain of your soul, and then here's the key point, and the suffering of the gods. Well, that means they're not gods, they're elite, they're personified. Why would God suffer? So then taking that one step further, um, someone who struggles with the gods is even thought to be crazy. They have thus prepared this shame, keyword two, for those who recognize them. At which point I'll jump to the French surrealist poet Paul Valéry, and I think if I paraphrase correctly, his definition of war was a massacre of people who don't know each other for the profit of people who know each other but don't massacre each other. And so, and yeah, so there's this whole, and then the, indelible quest for power. And, but Jung is who does something for me. So at that point, there's a realization that I am no longer a slave. I do not obey, I live, and consequently, I will have my own back and protect myself. So ask the gods what they think of my suggestion. Well, they'll go back to they have thus prepared this shame too. They will not admit that they are just people. So I think this is an important pinnacle or keystone here of where the one is the many and the many are the one, instead of, if you say the one stands next to the many, well, then that's probably Jesus and an external deity, external divinity. The one as the many, that's the internal inner divinity. So I think what's interesting here is Jung is really outing the, I love the title, The Gods Must Be Crazy, that movie. A Coke bottle lands on the primitive's head, and, there you go, the rest of the movie. But it sends him on a journey. So the unknown. So I think here that whole thing of, war being a massacre of people who don't know each other for the profit of people who do know each other and don't massacre each other.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
that's so prophetic just now, isn't it?
yeah.
Okay, so I have a little simpler take on this, which is that basically the whole Red Book, okay, we're almost at the end, so we can say now that basically the whole Red Book is Dr. Jung coming to the realization of what his life was going to have to be for the rest of his life. Um, and so I'm not sure when this would have been written. Let's see, May 31st, 1916. So World War One has begun, but um, not reached any sort of conclusion yet. In fact, the United States didn't enter World War One until 1917. So here is a neutral Swiss German um, intellectual stuck in sort of the midst of a war, but he's already quite old. I mean, he's already, let's see, he was 25 plus 35 plus 6. He was 41, so he was probably too old to really serve as a combatant. And in fact, what the Swiss did uh, was provide um, prisoner of war camps. Um, I'm not too sure which side they provided a prisoner of war camp for, but
Probably had a fence in the middle, and they did both.
right. So Dr. Jung, at one point, he was on active duty. Swiss men are called to active duty when the Swiss need them, and every Swiss man is responsible, and the authorities give every Swiss man a rifle and ammunition, but on condition that they not break the seal on the ammunition. If you're a
Mhm.
Swiss man and you break the seal on the ammunition, you can be found to be guilty of a felony, in fact, unless there's war declared.
Right.
And so Dr. Jung was considered a reservist. He was a medical doctor, obviously, and a psychiatrist. And he was periodically called for active duty during World War One, but in a non-combatant role. And in one of his roles, he was a POW camp commander, which is something that I actually did in Vietnam. So another way our lives have paralleled. um, but in any case, it's at during this period from around October 12th, 1913, to this time in 1916, so about 3 years, that Jung, and especially in the early part, in the first 10 weeks, as we've discussed, the Red Book has 80% of its content. And so this
Mhm.
is 3 years later, and Jung is looking back out at it, and therefore he's scrutinizing what he wrote, and that those scrutinies, which is why this is called scrutinies, that scrutiny um, has yielded these new passages. And so Shamdasani, to his eternal credit, decided that they should be included in the Red Book, and I believe he was quite right, because it does have a continuity, and it is this first 3 years of World War One. Um,
It's interesting there, I think, because this whole 30% of the work, there's a 30% pivotal amount of you know
right.
dense work. It reminds me a bit of Frank Lloyd Wright, who he did 30% of his career's work between the ages of 80 and 92.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this, you get to the keystone, and they just start pouring out this dense, robust, quality work.
Yeah.
So instead of coming to a slow end, they're sliding in all used up. They're
Yeah,
gonna they're gonna
right.
they're gonna take it all the way to the end.
Right. And many people who've done famous things have done that. Certainly, Picasso worked on a painting right up to about 6 or 7 hours before he died.
Mhm.
And and if you look at the extent of my life, which has been quite broad in experience, but my focus on Jung has narrowed and narrowed and narrowed back down to this red book, because I think what he teaches here is really profound, and it's something that we all need to get. Grok, we all need to get it. And so I think that one of the things that's happening here is that Jung, during this 3 year period, is having a realization of the fact that, oh crap, I'm going to have to be writing for the next 50 years, which is what he did. And, or at least 40 some years, that he had to actually write most of the collected works.
I,
And
it's interesting. I think with this, I just noticed too. I mean, since leading the blind is not easy, they will corrupt even their slaves. What's interesting is all of the nutrition lies we've been fed for the last 30 years. High fiber, all this grain, all that kind of stuff. Um, the ancient Romans fed their slaves grain to keep them weak and compliant, and the people in charge ate meat. And there's this whole, oh my God, meat causes cancer and all this these days. And what's interesting is if you look at the whole of the study, they didn't really mark out that that meat those people were eating was from McDonald's within large sticks for fries and airbrush lettuce crap, basically. So interesting to me how much modern day has historic slavery methods. And so, I mean, no, there's no one size fits all diet for anyone. But at the same time, I look at they will corrupt even their slaves. I start to think, what, did they feed them meat to make them strong? Or did I mean, they will corrupt even their slaves, to me, has kind of a double, triple meaning. And it,
yeah, and for if we take the American prison system, for example,
right.
um, that has now become a new form of slavery. It's modern slavery,
Yeah.
because what the powers that be, industrial powers that be, figured out was that they could get cheap labor for less than minimum wage at the prisons. And so they started to agree to take prison labor for their work. And so, I don't know what you get paid in prison, but it's in the pennies a day rather than the $15 an hour that's now being demanded.
But if
Um,
you look at the diet too, they have a high incidence of flax seeds, which honestly, seed oils are made for industrial machines, not for human consumption. And
mhm,
um, that's another piece. But flax seeds are one of the highest, I think the second highest in phytoestrogen, which in males make a feminine quality. They reduce the testosterone. And in females, the overage of estrogen causes cancer. So
mhm.
they use the same thing in both prisons for both genders, and it causes a demeaning male and then a sickening female. So again, I mean, the price of their labor is that they stay alive, behind bars. So, yeah, I mean, prison is another form of slavery. It's just institutionalized, yeah,
Yeah,
and privatized.
and precisely. So anyway, Jung is at this point realizing that he's got a lot of writing to do. I've
Mm-hmm.
essentialized what he realized um, into the following comment. In the late 19th century, um, Nietzsche said God is dead. And Jung came along in the next century and said God is not dead. Furthermore, I know where he lives, or where God lives, not he. I know where God lives, and I know how he goes about doing the work of the Godhead. And what we're seeing in today's current events is precisely that. Um, there was a movie, a prophetic movie some years ago called There Will Be Blood. And if you go back now and review the Red Book, you'll see that there's a lot of blood in the Red
Mm-hmm.
Book, lots of it. And um, and this was also at a time when there was blood, and we've had lots of times since then when there was blood, and we're entering such a time again. And I was just hearing some news commentary before I came down here this morning, and it's almost there's almost resignation among the talking heads that we're being led into basically a world war. And it's, the Ruskies and the Chinese and the North Koreans and the Iranians against the rest of us. And we better wake up to that fact. And, we have the GOP whistling past the graveyard, and the rest of us recognizing that oh yes, things do repeat themselves, and here we are again with the world preparing for a world war, and we've perhaps yesterday seen the first waves of that world war. We'll probably know in a week how bad it's going to be, but it's non-trivial. And
It
um,
is not trivial. And to me, the whole history repeats itself. I can look at the microcosm of that just in my own life when, the universe hands me the same hand of cards and basically says, okay, here's a pretty similar situation to what you had back there. And the question the universe asks is, are you still a dumbass? So,
right.
you know, and it's like, oh, I think this time I'm going to do it something different. And
Right.
with that, it's interesting to me if I generalize Freud and Jung. Freud basically says that, we're haunted by ghosts. And okay, that's cool. But in regards to Jung, it's kind of vague because you get into Jung and you realize, oh, no, no, we're ruled by gods and demons inside. So he
Yeah.
plays a different specific intensity. So I think looking at this, how are you being led and who are you going to believe? And what's interesting is even the polarization is a smokescreen because you get both people pretty much saying the same thing with one just seems a little more polite in the way they're saying the same damn thing.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So there's a comment here from Richard. First, he says at that point, one sells a soul and they are aware of it. But then he says Jung was insightful to the schizophrenic, no doubt. But how did he use his thoughts to heal patients? By thoughts, I mean the beings that he gleaned his knowledge from. Well, um, first of all, those beings are Jung himself, and he he simply realized through his active imagination and through his conversations with the emanations of his psyche, um, what he thought as an individual. And in answer to your question, do you want to comment on that, Jordan, before I go on?
Yeah, actually, there's a Harvard psychiatrist, Dr. Georgia Ede, who recently took 10 or 12 of her over a decade long schizophrenics who had had zero improvement with any kind of pharmacological prescription, and she took them off the meds slowly and she put them on a full carnivore diet, and within 3 weeks every single one of them was starting to function as a human being with boundaries. And she's starting to turn schizophrenia a little bit on its ear, that instead of they crash through these internal boundaries, that there's a calculus of a complex brain fog from a malnutrition perspective.
Hmm.
So what I think was interesting with Jung is that I've never looked at this, and I just thought about this. Kind of wonder what he ate, because he's got such an intensely powerful clarity, and he can see all of these things inside. And I think from that he could see what someone else was probably going through.
Well, he
And
was known to be a carnivore, that's for sure.
yeah, well, yeah, and I think that's the thing, is the whole red meat thing. It's been given such a bad rap, and what's interesting is, um, some people who have problems sleeping, put them with salmon, and all of a sudden the omega 3s, and they're sleeping like a baby. So there's
Yeah.
these things. I mean, I'm out in the sun,
Mm.
so people are like, "Oh my God, skin cancer." I'm like, "Nah, take astaxanthin. It's like shrimp orange." So people in coastal areas typically have higher sun protection, and that's
Yeah.
basically oceanic melatonin. So I
Wow.
go back to this Dr. Georgia Ede, where it's wonderful, where instead of coming against whatever the modern status quo is, she tried something new, which is always, oh yeah, this didn't work, so let's try something else. And that basically says no one knows. But I think she stumbled into, and it's probably not 100%, but in that group, she had almost everyone, I think, making market improvements. And it's a whole different ball of wax. Instead of, here, let me give you a failed heart attack medicine that's now a psych med. I mean, I mean, I look
Yeah.
at, what is it? I think Viagra was a failed heart medication or something. And oh, it didn't work for this, so let's sell it for that. And but I think that you do not want to obey the gods. I think here with the even the gods suffer, it's like, well, who are the people not massacring themselves that know each other, causing the other people to massacre themselves that don't know
Yeah.
each other?
Yeah, that's funny because Viagra is basically failed and then it had a side effect.
Yeah, it has side effects.
And so it's sold as by its side effect now.
Well, it's sold by its side effect. It's me. The side effect is the same thing as getting bitten by a wandering spider.
Yeah,
You know,
it's like I walked into well, I was in my doctor's office and I had a little set to with the staff, and so that doctor's office had put me on um, a steroid, prednisone, to cure my sinus infection,
right?
and a known side effect of the medicine is irritability. And
Mm-hmm.
so I went into the room. I was 2 hours late for my appointment because uh, I just old age. I just forgot. And the telephone system for this particular practice is hopeless. And so rather than try to call them, I decided to go in and take a chance that they could give me my allergy shots. And I came into the practice and the waiting room was basically empty, but they became very officious and said, no, you're more than 10 minutes late. We won't take you, period, blah, blah, blah. And so obviously that rankled my irritability. And uh, so I got a letter from one of the managers of the practice, and she threatened to drop me from the practice if I ever shouted at their staff again. So I haven't responded to her yet, but I'm planning to thank
Hmm.
her for providing me with clear evidence that their practice um, will drop someone from their practice for having a known side effect for something that their practice provided.
Yeah, it's like,
That's not malpractice. I don't know what is.
well, and actually, even beyond that, I think that's, as a business owner, that's cause for firing your doctor. I mean, because
Well, or
you
that's
know,
cause for firing that manager. But anyway, I'm not going to get
well,
into it any further. But anyway, I want to go back to Richard's question, which was how did Trump? I'm sorry, how did Jung. Boy, there's a
Freudian
Freudian
slip.
slip. Yeah. How
Not
did
a
Jung
Jungian one.
how did Jung heal his patients? And the answer is that he simply talked to them. Okay. And so, unlike Freud, who refused to get into the relationship with the patient and therefore had them lie down on a couch not looking at Freud,
Mm-hmm.
um, Jung simply sat across the desk from them and or across the room, chair to chair, and simply had a conversation with them. And very often they were cured. And um, of
And
course,
I will qualify that Freud was talk therapy. Jung was a driver's ed teacher. He was teaching you how to navigate your inner workings in
right,
that conversation,
exactly,
not
exactly.
talk
And
therapy.
so there's two levels of duality that affect us. One is neurosis, which can be cured by psychology. Um, and Jung's solution for a neurosis is simply to draw a corral around it and put it over in the side of your mind and say, yeah, I have that, and there it is. And
Mm-hmm.
if the situation comes up again, uh, I, I'm going to recognize that it's my neurosis, and I'm going to uh, behave differently. I'll have the discussion I just had with about my irritability. Sure, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm irritable, and when you give me prednisone, I'm probably going to be more irritable.
Well, it's interesting
Right?
too that things with known side effects like that are still put out there, basically saying, "Are you dumb enough to take the advice of the alleged expert?" I mean, I remember I had a horrible throat infection in high school, and they gave me codeine, but it had the purple covered capsule. And one of the known prevalent side effects of the purple dye is irritability to the point of violence. And whereas the orange cap doesn't do anything usually. Well, I was sitting there at school and my locker partner comes up and she taps me on the back, and I'm glad she was 5 feet tall. I spun around to grab whoever it was by the neck. And the reality is, I was just trying to grab myself. I mean, because it was just one to one mirror. But then I looked down and she goes, "There is no brown in your eyes. It's all pupil." I mean, so I was just out there in there. That's
Mm-hmm.
caveman hunting. And she's like, "You need to go home."
Yeah.
So then the doctor said, "Well, that's a known side effect. But don't tell your next doctor you know that, because they'll think that you know too much about things and they'll think you're a drug addict." And I'm
Uh,
going, medicine is not that much rocket science. No, thank you. I know that say, no, you have an allergy? Yeah, purple dye. So,
yeah.
you know,
So yeah, so moving on to schizophrenia now. Schizophrenia is um, a mental disease or defect, uh, and it's normally in modern times treated by medicine. So this is the
right,
distinction between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. A psychologist
right.
works through issues with you through neurosis, let's say, but a psychiatrist is needed to prescribe the medicines that a schizophrenic uses. Not to say that that's the best answer, and I think Jung would be very skeptical of this answer, but uh, it's the school solution today.
Well, and that's what
So
Dr. Georgia E. did, except the "May food be thy medicine." She prescribed red meat. And
right.
that simple prescription was completely countergrain to what everyone else is doing. And what I think is interesting, it sees through the blind spot of, oh, pharma has to be some fabricated, artificial, we're so brilliant, we put this together to solve that problem. Whereas nature's already solved the problem she got to. And so the food was the prescription. So it's interesting. You're right. I
Mhm.
mean, Jung would take issue. And I think my thing is that in some places, psychiatry should be illegal because hunters do not drug the deer before they go hunt them. And if
Right.
you medicate before you investigate, you have changed the person. And so you're going to medicate them and then go looking for healing. Well, you're not healing the same person. How do you know?
Right.
So there's a
So
lot of
anyway, the
a lot
short
of,
answer for Richard here is that he simply talked to his
yeah,
patients
you
and
did.
worked through it. Now, there's some more information here. Um, was he able to control his imagination, or was it held by the spirits? And I think that's a trick question, Richard, but he certainly uh, did not control his imagination in the context of the Red Book events. And it's not clear how many other active imaginations he did. Um, and and what I don't think that he controlled them. He did not. He conversed with them. He took what came, and he talked back to them and so on. But I don't think he tried to control them. In the same sense, when I had my experience with active imagination, which involved writing a novel, um, and I didn't know I was having an active imagination at the time, but as I look back on it, certainly I was. Uh, that was totally uncontrollable, and I was in the archetype, and that brings up the next comment here from State of Awakening, where he says, "It seems," he or she says, "it seems that schizophrenia indicates an individual that has become lost within the realm of the archetypes." I think Jung felt this as well as his encounters in hospital and cued him into research. And, I certainly think that that's true. And my, I know I was caught by an archetype when I wrote my um, when I wrote my novel. I refer to it as the autobiography of my anima for a period of 33 years. Okay, from 1962 to 1995. And so I refer to that as the autobiography of my anima. But in terms of um, and I went to research, but I didn't realize I was doing that, because when I came out of it, when it was over, I sometimes refer to these things as like a record on a jukebox. Once you get captured by an archetype, the record comes out of the jukebox and it starts to play. And once it starts to play, you're not going to stop it until it's done. It
You get the
plays.
earworm. Yeah, the earworm.
Right. It'll play until it reaches its end, which I think is the origin of many novels, and I think it's the reason many writers of novels um, go to drink or drugs, because they can't get back to that place where they know they were captured by their they don't know it was an archetype. Maybe they thought it was um, they think it's writer's block, quote unquote, but actually what they're looking for is to be captured by an archetype and then letting it flow. And so Hemingway once was asked, how does he write, and he says, I open a vein and bleed. um,
Mm-hmm.
and
And I think to respond to we see the verb control there. And I
Right.
think the verb control, I find from my clients, developmentally comes from all of us pretty much taught to be dutiful and have shame
Right.
instead of to navigate. And to me, control is an incarcerating verb. It averages things out, it imprisons the thought, it makes it feel like you have a control over your path. The reality is none of us do. So I've started to notice that, how do you eliminate writer's block? Well, people say live in the space between. That's cool, but it's also abstract. How do you live in the synapse? Because even if I look at two neurons as the nouns, there's a little leap of faith in every single electrical impulse between them. Well, so why do we then take issue with the big leaps of faith in life as if there's some bigger risk for doing the same thing with the same little things? And what I find is that whole control, I don't think Jung controlled. I think he navigated. And then what
Exactly.
happens is
The
nature is what nature is. Your psyche never turns off.
no,
Weather washes through, might not even be yours. But I start to notice, what verbs am I currently using? Am I saying to maintain? And well, that's a horrible word, because if it drops, I have to give it a handout and push it up. But God forbid it gets better. Keep it, So I think Jung not controlling, he was driver's ed teacher. He was navigating those archetypes.
precisely. And John Beebe had a conversation with me. John Beebe is another famous Jungian analyst, and we had an interview on one occasion, and he said to me that Jung had been my analyst, and I think that that's quite true. That rang precisely true. In fact, I probably knew that before John said it, um, but the point is that by reading Jung's work, I in effect had Jung as my analyst. And so I never have gone to an analyst or a psychologist for my treatment in any way. Um, but I do concur that Jung was my analyst. And so then Richard says he was just an observer. Well, he was more than an observer. As State of Awakening says here, he recognized symbols and then, as Jordan says, help people navigate those symbols. He would recognize the symbols of what archetype they represented, what archetype had come out of the jukebox and was playing for that person at that time, and he would help them navigate it. Very simple. And as I look at my work now, I work in a alternative school where many of the children on my caseload have diagnoses that are, in my view, questionable. Because as I look at these children, um, they're as I look at these children, I think they're just adolescents who are
Mm-hmm.
in a phase, basically.
Yeah.
And I normally say two things to them. One, you're in the time of life when you have to realize that you have to take responsibility for your own life. And that's a hard thing to have to accept, but that's the truth. Your parents are not going to be there for you. And you have to be responsible for your own life, number one. And the other thing I say to some, mostly my guys who get in trouble, is, when are you going to grow up?
Mm-hmm.
And I leave them with those questions, especially the last question, when are you going to grow up? Because I want them to contemplate that question, with the idea that that's a living entity in their psyche. And
Mm-hmm.
um, when they hear it multiple times, it starts to connect. And I have seen very significant change in some of these kids who at first come into me and they abuse me and call me an old man or something like that. And I say, yeah, tell me something I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. you know.
Well, and you're the way you're doing that with those two simple pieces, actually, to me, that is one of the most educated forms of discipline is the necessary failure of the mom and the dad, meaning I'm kicking you out of the nest. And what happens is you go out, and yes, there's danger, and your life is on your own line. But the risk to not leave the nest is the danger is worse. You will lose your soul if you do not leave home. So you're getting them to go out and find their own navigational nourishment
Yeah.
by growing up. And I think there is the trickster. People don't tell you what growing up means because it's different for everybody else, and
Sure.
everyone's the
Yeah.
same because everyone's different. So people are like, oh, I want to be different, like everybody else. So, but the thing is, it is the same concept, but it's not the same path.
Yeah.
So I think you're getting them to understand to go out there in the world, and what do you think? What's your
Yeah.
contribution?
And I do have students with very sad tales to tell. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I have a student whose mother died of a drug overdose when she was in the fourth grade. And, that sort of thing is very difficult. She's still struggling with it 4 years later. And, understandably. Um, and uh, she, I think that she is slowly, I'm seeing very small changes in her, but I am seeing her change. And some of the other students, have other quirks about the way they behave in the world. But the reality is that I'm able to deal with them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm able to change them over time.
Well, and
And
also too, you've in a sense caught her at the right time, because at 8, 7 and 8 is when the child naturally gravitates to the dad. So you have 7 years of nurturing, and then you start to get the formative, giving form to the formless. And so there's that Saturn discipline form piece, and you're coming into her life at 8. And so, in a sense, she's psychologically able and
well, no,
ready.
no, no. She's in the eighth grade now, so
Oh, eighth grade, not eighth
she's
year. Okay.
she's in this adolescent
Okay. So she's past that.
formative time for her. And I agree. When children hit adolescence, a lot of things are happening hormonally and otherwise, and they have to learn how to deal with it. And very
Right.
often their parents or grandparents um, don't know what to do. And uh, the best thing I can do is just be me, right?
Yeah,
And
and they've basically been handed a sports car when they've been driving a jalopy. And I mean, it's like getting a motorcycle that's too big. I mean, there's too much power. So you hit the gas, and all of a sudden immediately you wrecked. I
yeah,
mean, and they start to understand how much more, in a sense, octane they have in life, and they have to relearn basically how to walk.
yeah. And so Richard makes this comment that he's held by the spirits and he can't even picture an apple in my thoughts. And my response to that, Richard, is very simply, you just did. Okay, because the word apple, APPLE, is a symbol for the fruit that we call an apple. And so the fact that you can
Conceptualize.
pick you can imagine an apple, and you just did. There it is. It's right
And
there
what's
on the
interesting,
screen.
I think what's interesting there is, and Richard, I think that's a great point, because when we say we cannot, there is a dog cat piece of we don't understand the not. The thing
Yeah,
is the thing. So no matter how we describe the thing, it's still the thing. And right there, you conceptualized an apple,
yeah.
which means, in a sense, X marks the spot. There's the apple.
And everybody in this session just now imagined an apple, right?
Right.
One way or another.
And then I
Um,
started thinking elephant just to move on from the apple.
yeah. So refined hayseed Appalachian says the mystery of war, the darkness of magic, and the gift of religion. Um, I'm sorry, but we covered that that part of the Red Book about a year ago, and that isn't the purpose here because we're trying to get to the end. So I'm going to just leave that. But there is a chapter on this point in the Red Book, and everybody can go back to it. We commented on it long ago, and it's available on this YouTube channel. Um,
Yeah, and I think to
I'm
respond to the comment there too, one refined hayseed. I love the name. Um, it's interesting to me too. We're dealing with the Red Book in sequence, and we've passed that a ways ago. So thanks for bringing that up. But rather than just a general weekly conversation, we're speaking of specific paragraphs.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going for the gold here. Can you see the screen again, Gordon?
Yes.
Okay. So my soul answered, the gods want you to do for their sake what you know you do not want to do. I thought so, I exclaimed. Of course, that is what the gods want. But do the gods also do what I want? I want the fruits of my labor. What do the gods do for me? They want their goals to be fulfilled, but what about mine? This infuriated my soul, and she said, you are unbelievably defiant and rebellious. Consider the facts that the gods are strong. I know, I replied, but no longer is there any unconditional obedience. When will they use their strength for me? They also want me to place mine in their service. What is their payment in kind? That they are tormented? Man suffered agony, and the gods were still not satisfied, but remained insatiable in their devising of new torments, which we're seeing right now in our current affairs. They allowed man to become so blinded that he believed that there were no gods and that there was only one God who was a loving father, so that today someone who struggles with the gods is even thought to be crazy. They have thus prepared this shame too for those who recognize them out of the boundless greed for power, since leading the blind is not easy. They will corrupt even their slaves. You do not want to obey the gods. You do not want to obey the gods? My soul cried, astonished. I answered, I believe that I believe that has already gone on more than enough. Hence, the gods are insatiable because they have received too many sacrifices.
Yep.
The altars of blinded humanity are streaming with blood, but dearth but dearth doesn't makes but dearth makes contentment, not abundance. May they learn dearth from men. Who does something for me? That is the question that I must pose. In no case will I do what the gods would have to do. Ask the gods what they think of my suggestion. Then my soul divided herself. As a bird, she swooped up into the higher gods, and as a serpent, she crawled down to the lower gods. Soon afterward, she returned and said, troubled, the gods are outraged that you do not want to be obedient. That bothers me very little, he replied. I
Nice.
have done, I have done everything to placate the gods. May they do their share now. Tell them I can wait. I will let no one tell me what to do. The gods may devise a service in return. You can go. I will call you tomorrow so that you can tell me what the gods have decided. As my soul departed, I saw that she was shocked and worried, since she belonged to the race of gods and demons and forever sought to convert me to their kind, as my humanity would like to convince me that I belong to the clan and must serve it. When I was asleep, my soul came again, and in a dream cunningly painted me as a horned devil to terrify me and make me afraid of myself. In the following night, however, I called my soul and said to her, your trick was recognized. It is to no avail. You do not frighten me. Now speak and convey your message. She answered, the gods give in. You have broken the compulsion of the law. Therefore I painted you as a devil, since he is the only one among the gods who bows to no compulsion. He is the rebel against the eternal law, uh, thanks to his deed, there are also exceptions. Thus, one does not necessarily have to. The devil is helpful in this respect, but it should not happen without seeking counsel from the gods. This detour is necessary, or else you will fall prey to their law despite the devil.
Actually, before
Yeah,
you continue, I want everyone to notice how she's still an owner's representative on behalf of the gods, that now he's in the devil, and so he hasn't really left. And what Jung has done is he's already flown the nest of the gods. He is no longer at the beck and call of the parental divinity. So if you look at this, she's really trying to then double blind sabotage, give him his alleged freedom, but tell him he still hasn't left. So incarcerate the mind and make him feel free, except that no, he hasn't really left. Now he's one of the demons. So what does he feel about that?
right.
So he doesn't
And
care.
and we have a fascinating exchange here between refined hayseed, Appalachian, and Richard. Refined hayseed says, "My soul cries for the thing maybe outside the lords of this world." Richard says, "Gods with a small g." Refined says, small I and small g. And Richard says, otherwise known as fallen angels or bastards of them, to be precise. Okay, now what I want to emphasize here is that all of these things are of this world. Okay, in other words, everything that was in my active imagination in 1993, it came entirely from my psyche, but it was of this world. It was in me. Everything that happened to me subsequent to being visited by Mephistopheles, when my daughter told me, you're going to hell, Dad. Well, yeah, I went to hell. I went to hell right then for about a decade. And it took Carl Jung to let me find my way out of it. And so the reality is, all the gods and all the devils are within us, and they are quite real. That's the one of the main points of Carl Jung. Okay, you can find it explicitly in paragraph 751 of Answer to Job.
Well, and also, yes, and I think the conversation between Refined Hayseed and Richard is actually a complete mirror of the soul's deception, the soul trying to deceive Jung here, because he's left the nest. And so the small I, the small g, the large I, the large g, those are all still in the divinity nest. And so either if they're inside or outside, rather than that, to me, the nest of capital S self, living itself continually into being with an inner divinity, except not at the beck and call of those forces where you're navigating. I mean, I'm not at the beck and call of any given tree or rock on the road. I don't want to smack into them, but at the same time, I can also safely often ignore them if I'm on asphalt. So it's the kind of thing where I think you find your own path and you literally pave your own way, even if you're on four-wheel drive on foot through rocks where there are no trails. But I think
Right.
it's interesting that between Refined Hayseed and Richard, they're having the same conversation as the soul is here with Jung,
Right.
except Jung has left the room. You know, he's
Right.
not He's not at their beck and call, or even their convincing. He is not agreeable and he will not cow. So there isn't this, I need permission to go to the pool. I'm an
Yeah.
adult. Housekeeping's going to be waiting for me. So I'll do that later and go to the pool now.
Right. Okay. So let's go for the gold here. Um,
Let's try to get through the whole thing.
Here the soul drew near to my ear and whispered, the gods are even happy to turn a blind eye from time to time, since basically they know very well that it would be bad for life if there were no exception to eternal law. Hence their tolerance of the devil. She then raised her voice and cried loudly, the gods have mercy upon you and have accepted your sacrifice. And so the devil helped me to cleanse myself from commingling in bondage. And the pain of one-sidedness pierced my heart, and the wound of being torn apart scorched me. It was noon on a hot summer day, and I was taking a stroll in my garden when I reached the shade of the high trees. I met Philemon strolling in the fragrant grass, but when I sought to approach him, a blue shade came from the other side. And when Philemon saw him, he said, I find you in the garden, beloved. The sins of the world have conferred beauty upon your countenance. The response, the suffering of the world has straightened your shape. You are truly a king. Your crimson is blood. Your ermine is snow from the coldness of the poles. Your crown is the heavenly body of the sun, which you bear on your head. Welcome to the garden, my master, my beloved, my brother. The shade replied, O Simon Magus, or whatever your name may be, are you in my garden or am I in yours? Philemon said, you are, O master, in my garden, Helena, or whatever you choose to call her, and I are Helena, or whatever you choose to call her, are your servants. You can find accommodation with us. Simon and Helen have become Philemon and Bacchus, and so we are the host of the gods. We granted hospitality to your terrible worm, and since you come forward, we take you in. It is our garden that surrounds you. The shade answered. Odds, and no longer
Actually,
mourn.
your audio cut out at right when you said the shade answered.
Okay, I'll go back to that. The shade answered, is this garden not mine? Is not the world of the heavens and the spirits my own? Philemon said, you are, O master, here in the world of men. Men have changed. They are no longer the slaves and no longer the swindlers of the gods, and no longer mourn in your name, but they grant hospitality to the gods. The terrible worm came before you, whom you recognize as your brother insofar as you are of divine nature, and as your father insofar as you are of human nature. You dismissed him when he gave you clever counsel in the desert. You took the counsel, but dismissed the worm. He finds a place with us, but where he is, you will be also. When I was Simon, I sought to escape him with the ploy of magic, and thus I escaped you. Now that I gave the worm a place in my garden, you come to me. The shade answered, do I fall for the power of your trick? Have you secretly caught me? Were not deception and lies always your manner? But Philemon answered, recognize, O master and beloved, that your nature is also of the serpent. Were you not raised on the tree like the serpent? Have you laid aside your body like the serpent of its skin? Have you not practiced the healing arts like the serpent? Did you not go to hell before your ascent? And did you not see your brother there, who was shut away in the abyss? Then the shade said, You speak the truth. You are not lying. Even so, do you know what I bring? This I know, Philemon answered. I know only one thing, that whoever hosts the worm will also needs his brother. What do you bring me, my beautiful guest? Lamentation and abomination were the gift of the worm. What will you give us? The shade answered, I bring you the beauty of suffering. This is what is needed by whoever hosts the worm.
Christ as self.
Right. Okay, so that is the punchline and the end. Um, and so comments, Jordan?
I think right there at the end, the Christ symbol figure not being inside, not being outside, not being the many, not being the one. It's self. And to me, that's not egomaniacal. It's the ego strength of I have my value and I will cultivate my value with that worm in the dirt, the depths. And I will continue to cycle sex, death, resurrection, life. And I think what's interesting there, he mentions Zion in the footnote, but at the end, that is what is needed by whoever hosts the worm. I would add to have Christ as self. So, in that sense, then I can cancel the equation and balance the calculus of the fraction and just say self.
Yeah. So let me go back to a few footnotes here while everybody gathers their thoughts. This was written June 1st, 1916, and the shade in Black Book 6, the shade is identified as Christ on page 85. Okay, then
And notice
footnote.
the heavenly body of the sun on the head. There's a crown
Oh,
chakra.
sure. Okay, then in 154, footnote 154, Simon Magus, first century, was a magician. In the Acts of the Apostles, 8, 9 through 24, after becoming a Christian, he wished to purchase the power of transmitting the Holy Spirit from Peter and Paul. Jung saw this account as a caricature. Further accounts of him are found in the apocryphal Acts of Peter and in writings of the Church Fathers. He has been seen as one of the founders of Gnosticism, and in the second century, as some Simonian sect arose. He is said to have always traveled with a woman who he found in a brothel in Tyre, who was the reincarnation of Helen of Troy. Jung cited this as an example of the anima figure. On Simon Magus, okay, there's a bunch of stuff here. Um, Footnote 155. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, of course, Jung commented, in such dream wandering, one frequently encounters an old man who is accompanied by a young girl, and examples of such couples are to be found in many mythic tales. Thus, according to Gnostic tradition, Simon Magus went about with a young girl whom he had picked up in a brothel. Her name was Helen, and she was regarded as the reincarnation of the Trojan Helen. Klingsor and Kundry, Lao Tzu and the Dancing Girl likewise belong in this category.
I would add there Tinkerbell to Captain Hook.
Yep, absolutely. Correct. Okay, and then the worm is referred to as Satan in footnote 156. 157, your brother came before you, O master, the terrible worm, who you dismissed when he gave you clever counsel in the desert with a tempting voice. And then 158, since he is your immortal brother. And 159, Jung commented on the serpent as an allegory of Christ in Ion. Okay.
Yeah.
So that is the end. We have reached, after 2 years of reading and commentary, Jordan and I being the most diligent of the commenters, have reached the end of the Red Book. And
So now when we finish the red book, there's 63 more crayons in the box and a sharpener. We should go for all the other colored books.
right. uh, and and so let's see. I need to go for a bio break. I'll be right back, Jordan.
Okay.
So you are good to go. I'm going to be.
So I appreciate the conversation in the comments where it really actually was tracking right along with the text. And um, I've had that happen before where the text happens and two people start speaking. Honestly, you guys, Richard and Refined Tasty Appalachia, um, you're both speaking the truth from different perspectives. So to me, there is the truth. But what's interesting is then with perspective, multiple things can be true. So I love that the perspective in the comments was didn't seem like you guys were arguing. It was you were sharing. So I think that's really cool. I like about the comments that we typically see here with people. There's a dignity in the difference, and that we're simply sharing. And I certainly am not proselytizing to try to convince anybody of any given thing. And I like that in the comments, people are very, very firm and intense with their perspectives. But I don't find that validation is anything for except for parking. And so people seem to have I think, a general confidence in the comments. And throughout the last couple of years doing the Red Book, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's participated and has commented continually and shown up consistently. Um, so that I think a chemistry over time is developed of acceptance and not needing to change anyone's mind. So thank you everybody for being in the comments as you have been for the last couple of years. I would actually add one last thing. When the last piece, the shade answered, I bring you the beauty of suffering. That is what is needed by whoever hosts the worm. I think the beauty of suffering there is, besides, thanking everyone in the comments for their dignity and difference for the last couple of years and interacting with each other pretty much respectfully most of the time. Um, the beauty of suffering, I would just say, find the treasure in the trouble. Don't waste trouble, because when the trouble comes, there's a piece of you're intensified. Some people go off the handle, but if you can navigate the intensity, maybe you find the beauty and the treasure in any kind of suffering, where there's a different kind of treasure that maybe you just simply haven't seen before.
Okay. Right. And what we have to realize is the suffering is about the fact that we are all in duality. Okay. That
Mm-hmm.
is the essence of human life. And um, every time you deny something, its opposite will be there. If you deny
Mm-hmm.
that there is a God, God will be there. Okay. Jung had that over his door.
Yeah. Yeah.
Called or not, the gods will be present, right?
And that goes
Uh,
back to the not thing that we talked about before, the being deceived by the soul towards the end, or attempting to be deceived.
right.
where you start talking about the not thing, or the small I, small g, large I, large g. Well, neither either way you go with those, neither is going to alleviate the other's suffering. And so if you step up above it and don't have either, then you can move forward, which is again a metaphor for fly the nest.
Yeah. And State of Awakening has a nice comment here. It's nice to share this space together and to hear all of the different perspectives of the content on the content. It has it proves it has proven to be a great way to spend one's awareness. Um,
What a
and,
wonderful comment. Thank you.
and Richard says suffering is a penance to God. Thankfully, I'm having mine while still in the flesh. I meant to that because uh, after you're gone, there's not much left. Um,
I heard I
but
saw
the good news is that when you're dead, you don't know you're dead. It only is difficult for your family. When you're stupid, it works the same way.
well, it's funny, but yeah, it's stupid. It works the same way. I saw a cartoon yesterday and said someone's like, "Oh, I thought you died yesterday," and the guy says, "Well, I did, but you you look very alive and very intense. What happened?" Well, they took me to hell. Well, but you died. He goes, "Yeah, but some things went on, and I'm not allowed back down there."
Yeah. Sherry makes a very great comment too. Our demons, our dwarfs, our witches, our prince, our kings, our queens, our crevices and grails, and our ors all are here now to teach us. Amen to that.
Mhm.
Life,
Yeah.
living, and death are one. Absolutely. Um, and
There's the
so
worm, that worm in the garden underneath the dirt.
right. And so in order to tie a bow around this now, I want to do one thing, and that is I want to go back to something that Jung said in the very first chapter, in the way of what is to come. Mind you, Jung was very cognizant of the fact that his way was not your way. His way is not my way.
Mhm.
Um, and his experiences with active imagination were not my experiences with active
Mhm.
imagination. I've had a lot of them, and I've had tandem experiences with active imagination where I do active imagination with someone else. And all these things were quite different from Jung's, okay?
Mhm.
Um, and And so, so even if you do that, even if you do active imagination, that too isn't your way necessarily. I mean, we do, some people call it prayer, right? Some people call it meditation. And we all have a way. My way has changed somewhat over the years. And so I just want to go back to Jung's fundamental experience at the beginning, and then I'll tell you when he italicizes, because this is really the point, and really part of the point that we have to take away from this, other than the fact that we're all human beings, we're all going to suffer.
Right.
There is always duality, and that's the deal. Okay.
Yeah.
We have to accept the suffering in order to be a human being. Okay. So
And
he's
I would add to that, we have to accept the suffering. But guess what? We don't have to suffer the suffering. We can use that as a different kind of exploration. Again, don't waste trouble, find the treasure in the trouble. So with the suffering, even, I look at myself and say, I always say both and, all of it. Even that though, it the only thing that makes my life better is my attitude about when things happen that I didn't want or like, is how I handled them, how I navigate them because I
Yeah.
certainly don't control them.
Righto. Okay, so I want to go back to the beginning and see if I can put it on the screen because at the beginning I don't think we were showing the actual text.
Right.
And okay, so I think, okay, Liber Primus. Okay, so I'm going to read from chapter, uh, the first chapter. Um, and Jung, let's see. All right, so Jung is talking about one of the prophetic dreams that he had prior to World War One. And let me see if I can figure out when he had this dream. I think this may be the dream on October 12th. Maybe I don't have it right here in the footnote, but um, so he was having these precognitive dreams and visions before um, before the beginning of World War One, and it was because of these that he recognized the collective unconscious and recognized that it exists, and so it's important for us to understand um, that his observation of the collective unconscious occurred at this time. That was his what he later said was the main innovation that he brought to the party. Um, and um, and I'll tell you my criticism of him in a minute and how that has resolved. But um,
I think the main innovation of the unconscious is a wonderful leaving the enslavement of the gods, so to speak, or even a god, to come back to the divinity of how you live that. Because what's interesting is for him to see the capital U unconscious and be aware, conceptualize it, experience it, and then share it. He's stepping past egomaniacal to simply state what is. Most people would have said, "Oh, well, I don't know about that precognizance, and there's no scientific evidence." And he forensically knew what he saw, and it wasn't him. And when he's aware of the other there, that there's a connection to all. That I think that to me is at scale in situ. It's one of the most um, I think courageous observations,
yeah,
because most people would say, "Oh, delusion of grandeur. I don't, I'm not the whole world," and they would stop out of a false sense of modesty. Where he's no, and it's not me. It doesn't make me all that, but it's a whole nother thing that all of us have. So I think that he followed through on the whole idea of the unconscious as the most powerful observation. I agree on that.
yeah. And one thing further to observe, Jung didn't think the world was ready for the Red Book.
Right.
And when he died in 1961, on June 6, 1961, um, he had, in the previous months, had conversations with his family and some of his friends about the publication of the Red Book. And his response was, who would understand it? Well, now many of us understand it. Um, but probably in 1961 it would not have been understood. So he was right about that. And to Sonusham Dasani's great credit, huge credit, he recognized how important it was. He under he understood it. Sonusham Dasani, who's the editor and the main one of the main translators of the Red Book, um, understood it, negotiated with the family to release it so that it could be published, and um, and he worked on it for a quarter of a century
Yeah.
between the 13 years that it took him to publish the Red Book once he was given permission, and several years before that when he was preparing to make his case to the family, um, and the decade that he took after the publication of the Red Book, when the public at large started to demand publication of the black books.
Hmm.
Um, he dedicated himself for that entire quarter of a century to this work, the work that is summarized in the Red Book and is um, essentialized in the Red Book, but which also is from the clinical notes of the black books.
Right.
And and so it's all of a piece. And he understood its importance, and he knew that people like us would be discussing it. And so it has. So what I'm going to read right now then is I'm going to read a bit of his prefigurative dreams and visions, and then his final remarks for chapter one, which appears in italics in the Red Book. And I'll put it up on the screen so you can follow along. And so here it is. Okay. It happened in the year 1913 as I was leaving alone for a journey, that during the day I was suddenly overcome in broad daylight by a vision. I saw a terrible flood that covered all the northern and low-lying lands between the North Sea and the Alps. It reached from England up to Russia, and from the coast of the North Sea right up to the Alps. I saw yellow waves swimming rubble and the death of countless thousands. This vision lasted for 2 hours. It confused me and made me ill. I was not able to interpret it. 2 weeks later, 2 weeks passed, then the vision returned, still more violent than before, and an inner voice spoke. Look at it. It is completely real, and it will come to pass. You cannot doubt this. I wrestled again for 2 hours with this vision, but it held me fast. It left me exhausted and confused, and I thought my mind had gone crazy. From then on, the anxiety toward the terrible event that stood directly before us kept coming back. Once I also saw a sea of blood over the northern lands. In the year 1914, in the month of June, at the beginning and end of the month, and at the beginning of July, I had the same dream 3 times. I was in a foreign land, and suddenly, overnight, and right in the middle of summer, a terrible cold descended from space. All seas and rivers were locked in ice. Every green living thing had frozen. The second dream was thoroughly similar to this, but the third dream at the beginning of July went as follows. I was in a remote English land. It was necessary that I return to my homeland with a fast ship as speedily as possible. I reached home quickly. In my homeland, I found that in the middle of summer, a terrible cold had fallen from space, which had turned every living thing into ice. There stood a leaf bearing but fruitless tree, whose leaves had turned into sweet grapes, full of healing juice from the working of the frost. I picked some grapes and gave them to a great waiting throng. In reality, now, it was so. At the time when the Great War broke out between the peoples of Europe, this is August 1st, 1914, I found myself in Scotland, compelled by the war to choose the fastest ship and the shortest route home. I encountered the colossal cold that froze everything. I met up with the flood, the sea of blood, and found my barren tree, whose leaves the frost had transformed into a remedy. And I plucked the ripe fruit and gave it to you, and I do not know what I poured out of for you. What bittersweet, intoxicating drink, which left on your tongues an aftertaste of blood. Okay, now I'm starting with the italicized portion. Believe me, it is no teaching and no instruction that I give you. On what basis should I presume to teach you? I give you news of the way of this man, but not of your own way. My path is not your path. Therefore, I cannot teach you. The way is within us, but not in God's, not in teachings, not in law, nor in laws. Within us is the way, the truth, and the life. Woe betide those who live by way of examples. Life is not with them. If you live according to an example, you thus live the life of that example. But who should live your own life if not yourself? So live yourselves. The signposts have all fallen. Unblazed trails lie before us. Do not be greedy to gobble up the fruits of foreign fields. Do you not know that you yourselves are the fertile acre which bears everything that avails you? Yet who today knows this? Who knows the way to the eternally fruitful climes of the soul? You seek the way through mere appearances. You study books and give ear to all kinds of opinion. What good is all that? There is only one way, and that is your way. You seek the path, I warn you away from my own. It can also be the wrong way for you. May each go his own way. I will be no savior, no lawgiver, no master teacher unto you. You are no longer little children. Giving laws, bettering, making things easier has all become wrong and evil. May each one seek out his own way. The way leads to mutual love in community. Men will come to see and feel the similarity and commonality of their ways. Laws and teachings held in common compelled people to solitude so that they may escape the pressure of undesirable contact. But solitude makes people hostile and venomous. Therefore, give people dignity and let each of them stand apart so that each may find his own fellowship and love it. Power stands against power, contempt against contempt, love against love. Give humanity dignity and trust that life will find the better way. The one eye of the Godhead is blind, the one ear of the Godhead is deaf. The order of its being is crossed by chaos. So be patient with the crippledness of the world and do not overvalue its consummate beauty.
Amen.
Amen. So I think we'll leave it at that and give everybody a chance to go back and look at that passage for themselves if they have the book. We
Mhm.
have been reading from the Red Book by C.G. Jung. We have been using the Reader's Edition. There is also the Folio edition. The Reader's Edition is about $40 now, I think, on Amazon. And as you see, mine is quite well worn. It has a faux leather cover, and mine has lost a lot of its cover. And as you see, I've marked a lot of passages, and every page is filled with markings. This one happens to
Mhm.
be marked in blood. I don't know why. And one of the things that I underlined here is we create the truth by living it. So,
It's funny that someone pulled a book off my shelf a couple of years ago. there are no markings in here, but it obviously is red because the back is broken and there are no markings. I said, that means I didn't like it.
Yeah. Well, I guess this is officially the end of the second time that I've read the entire Red Book cover to cover, online, recorded for the public. We are also in our advanced reading group doing it again. We haven't even gotten up to the official beginning of uh, the Active Imaginations, which is December 25th, 1913. And so if you would like to join us in the advanced reading group, we meet on Wednesdays at 5 o'clock U.S. Eastern Time. You can go to that link that I just put on YouTube, and there you can mark advanced reading group, and you'll receive the notices and the links for the advanced reading group every time you want to. And just so I'm wondering if I have the latest versions of my way. I'm not sure I do, but let me just see, because my way has become the way of Colleen Kibert, which I do via painting, what I would call abstract expressionism, but I'm trying to communicate with my unconscious. And so I can show you the latest version of this. This is not complete as yet. What the aspects of this that I've shown so far are the doodle, my doodle, and then my coloring of the doodle. The third phase, which is not complete on this piece, and which will be complete maybe in a week or two, is the Rocky. And so just so you can see what happens, very often other figures appear. And so here you can see my Swami friend here, Svengali, and in his turban he has these beings, but also he has this mother pig and a baby pig. And as I started to do the Rocky, I started to see that there's actually a litter of baby pigs there. Um, and so I haven't gotten any further than that on it, but this, I consider this a meditation technique. In other words, everybody has their own meditation technique. And I've done a lot of Buddhist meditation and so on, which was okay. I've been doing it for 30 years now, and I've used it a lot of times. I used the healing mantra, for example, when I was having oral surgery, and it got me through it without much anesthesia. But this, because of Colleen's teachings of us over the last 5 years or so, I've learned that this way works for me. And so every morning nowadays, I get up at 6 a.m. and I work on these pieces, and they're fascinating because the one that I just showed you is a size that takes about a month to complete. It's 18 by 24, and I'm not really doing it for sale, although I might try to sell some of these at some point, but I'm really doing it as a way to meditate and communicate with my unconscious, and it's been very effective for that, for me. And among other things, it has gotten me through a few tough weeks when I've had been in an 8 hour a day rankle for a week with 13-year-olds, and I need to get my psyche right, no matter
Mm-hmm.
where they are. And so it has served very well for that. And so whatever your way is, Jung has shown us our way, or his way, in very great detail. One of my ways has been to do this YouTube channel for the last 8 years,
Right.
and Jordan's way is to do his tarot readings, and I'm sure he's become quite influential on the square in Taos, New Mexico. And Jordan,
It's funny you say
tell us a
that.
little bit about your life and how your way works.
Well, it's interesting to me. It's like my mom says, look at you with the office with no walls. So you vacuumed the architecture out of your architecture to make the architecture a well-being. I laugh that people go by and they say, "Oh, I don't want to know," and I always say I'm no fortune teller. If I was, I'd be sitting on my own island. And people sit down though, and it's about, I think, inspecting their expectations, which to me are also known as blind spots,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can see actually what is to enhance your decision making. And I find that I'm glad I walk to and from work. It's only about a third of a mile. I've got one of those kind of Blue Rover Mars kind of carts, but even if no one sits down, being there outside, um, in such a wonderfully historic place, it's kind of a zen sit. And I could read all day long or have no one all day long, and it's almost the same. So as I get about halfway home, I start noticing my energy is kind of volcano erupting. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
wow. Because I've literally been like this all day, because it's a deep and powerful listening. And I don't say I get out of the way. There's more of an engaged conversation, but I'm not putting my way on them. It's about their life, their way. And when I see Jung saying, everyone find your own way, do not follow mine, your life, your way, my life, my way. And those aren't in conflict. And often there needs to be no contrast or comparison. There's just sharing. So I think what's interesting is, I sometimes wish I recorded, because some of the things I say, um, I could probably use, but
Well,
I
right,
forget them,
right,
immediately
and
afterwards.
so Jordan, let me tell you a red hot secret, right? Your iPhone. Do you have an iPhone?
Yeah.
Yeah, your iPhone has on it a recording device. Okay.
Oh, it does. It does. But
Yeah,
I just never.
and guess what? Your iWatch, if you make recording one of your options,
Yeah.
uh, you can put it on your iWatch. And so what you can do is hit that and it'll start your recording. You can do it very surreptitiously. Nobody sees you do it. And I sometimes do it for self-protection, to be honest.
No,
Okay.
no, I get it.
And um, so sometimes I'll just reach over to my watch and I'll click the recording on. And I've recorded many conversations with my wife, which are often profound because
Mm-hmm.
she's a Buddhist scholar, and I think most people know that she completed a 3 year retreat, which is the equivalent of, or for ordination in as a Buddhist nun, I guess, or Lama, but she didn't take ordination because she's married to me,
Yeah.
but she still has the knowledge, and so
Well, it's funny because I did record two last year, and I laugh that 9 months later, I still hadn't gone back to listen and transcribe.
right,
But recently, I discovered something called Otter, and it will almost instantaneously do give you a Word document that's a verbal transcription of the audio. And I have to say, a friend of mine did that with one of them. And there were a couple places it took me 4 days to figure out what I actually said because the autocorrect was just absurd.
yeah,
And it's like, that's not what I said, but I think it's called Otter, Otter. There's a free version and then a longer, a more bigger version. But what I realized with that is then I could record and just delegate it to that. So
yeah.
I may start doing that because what I realized is it was a waste of my time to record because I never went backwards to, I was always, I'm on to the next. But if
Well,
there's a,
yeah, one thing that I have thought about is the possibility of going back to all these recordings, and now there's I don't know, there's 1,400 recordings
under, yeah.
on this YouTube channel, and going back 8 years, and a lot of profound things have come out of not only my mouth but the mouths of others during the course of this effort, and I think at some point, you know I think I might give this as a task to my 10 grandchildren and say, you can publish some pretty profound things if you just go back and use this otter and make a transcript of some of
Yeah.
the things
Look,
that I've said and turn it into a book. You can start selling books that way, and you don't have
and
to
look
write
up
anything.
Otter, yeah, otter.ai. And it's otter.otter.ai. And it's just voice to text.
Hmm.
And that what's interesting is I mean, I don't have much of an accent, but I think what's interesting is that it's sometimes it's the polysyllabic words that it has no idea what I just said, but it says something. And I could say dictionary and it might say um, who knows what, it's like there's diction and Aries or something, and
Yeah.
but so I do know that there will be places where, and you and I are similar in this, after you've gone through something, we don't remember it. And
Yeah.
whether
Because it
numinous
comes
or
from
not,
the unconscious.
come from the
Unconscious.
unconscious. And I think there's also a leadership piece of, I don't need that again. I'm not
Right.
trying to impress myself. And so there's things that I don't forget, and there's things that I absolutely do forget. But half the time, the autocorrect piece, it's an improv. It is hilarious. It is hilarious.
I'm sure.
Hilarious.
I'm sure. Yeah,
I
absolutely.
like I said, I spent 3 4 days multiple times with one sentence going, and even in context, it just didn't. And I said something I probably never said before, but it took me so long to. I finally just had
Figure
to.
out what you had said.
Yeah, I finally had to do the Finnegan's Wake piece. If you read it out loud, it's an Irish accent with a couple too many Guinness, and then it makes sense, you know? And because it's
Oh,
hooked
that's
on
funny.
phonics, it's phonetically written. And but when I finally I'd memorize the text, and then I'd say it without looking at the text, and finally I could kind of hear what words was I actually trying to garble out. So, but anyway, so it's got its levity with the autocorrect piece. It's pretty hilarious sometimes.
So there are a few good comments here on YouTube, which I'll close with. But what I wanted to just mention is again, we will not be meeting next week.
Right.
Okay, I'm taking a mandatory uh, vacation with my wife on next Sunday, and so we will
Cool.
be meeting 2 weeks from now, and we will be reading the essay by Thomas Arzt from this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, Volume 1, edited by Thomas Arzt and Mary Stein. And Thomas's article is truly profound. I mean, there are many profound articles in this series, but Thomas's article takes the cake, and so we are going to read it and work our way through it. Um, and I think it'll help you with your lives. Now, let's see what else we have. Let's see. So Richard says, Refined Hayseed says, um, Jung took away all the characters on the stage for the theater of the world became a clean canvas, throwing away the chessboard. Fair enough. And Richard says, we all live in a world that's shared with spirit. Jung had the blessing curse of the beatific vision. Amen. Um, outside materium, I've been allowed great liberty here. Words fail, says Hayseed. The Invisible Man. Can you do a reading of the Black Books in the future? Well, that is 7 volumes, okay, which basically is sort of the same thing as the Red Book, although there are quite a few differences. So I did feel it was valuable to read it. I did read every word in the 7 volumes.
Mhm.
And so I would consider doing that. I'm going to consider doing that, but it's going to be a big task if we do it.
Mhm. And
And
also too, understanding there's the blood, sweat, and the tears, and then there's the poem. And we're sometimes get in the weeds when we look at the process too much. And
yeah,
at the same time, there's a process of what was Jung's product, the Red Book. So yeah, it's kind of a I'm back and forth on that. So it's a
yeah,
daunting,
but
large
then
task.
yeah, but then the Black Books are Shamdasani's product, right? I
Yeah,
mean, Jung didn't think of it as a product. They were just his notes.
yeah,
But
right,
Shamdasani did turn it into something that's very powerful. I acknowledge there are some really profound things in it which do not appear in
right.
the Red Book. And so I will consider it.
Yeah.
And and if Jordan will consider it, I'll consider giving him a set for
Uh,
his birthday or something. Uh, but
Let me think about it.
yeah,
That's a. I mean, the Red Book was 2 years.
well, the Black Books won't take that long because about half of them, and I've got volume
Picture, yeah,
two. I've got volume 2 right here, so I can show you what I'm talking about. So, volume 1 is just the story of Jung. Volume 2, this volume, uh, the black part is folio. It's
picture,
photocopies of the actual black books. In other
right,
words, it's if you read and speak German, that will have meaning to you. But the part that we would read would be only the white part, which is in
right,
English. And so if you wanted to have the original, here's the original in Jung's handwriting, not in his calligraphy
right.
handwriting, but in his actual handwriting. Whereas the Red Book, when he did it in the Red Book, he wrote it in German calligraphy.
Right.
So that itself is part of the work of art that Jung produced. Um, and as you see here, I've marked this up pretty heavily too. And this is a $300 set of books.
Right.
Um, and so there's a lot in it. A lot of it does correspond to the Red Book, and but there's a lot of differences also. So I'll think about it, and Jordan can think about whether he wants to work with me on it. I don't think I want to do it by myself. In other words, I
It's too
need,
big. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
honestly, if you did it by yourself, then I would tune in and watch you fall asleep because it's going to be too much. You know, it's tiring if you're not doing it by yourself. I mean, if I did it by
well,
myself, you'd probably see me sitting there hanging out. You know, it's
oh
like,
yeah, I mean that's what happens to me is that without having somebody
yeah,
to work with, and Sherry, thank you very much for the super chat. I do appreciate that. Um, the if I try to read these things myself, and I've done a lot of them, they are all here. For example, Answer to Job, I read end to end,
right.
and but sometimes it just hypnotizes me, and I'll be
Yeah,
talking, reading along, and all of a sudden, oh,
right.
I'm hypnotized, and uh, and so I've had many profound experiences doing that. One hugely numinous experience, which you probably know about when reading Answer to Job, but um,
You know, it's interesting.
it's a lot more fun to do it with a friend. That's what
Yeah,
I can say.
it is. I remember reading "Being and Nothingness" by Jean-Paul Sartre in college, and I mean, I two sentences. I had to actually every time I picked up that book, I had to go out to the track and walk the track while I was reading and try to stay in the middle so I didn't like wander off and bump into the fence or something. But it's like it's interesting to actually walk and read, but I had to do something physical to keep myself from falling asleep. It was just that hypnotizing.
So let's give it some thought over the coming several weeks while we take 2 weeks off and then take 2 to 3, 4 weeks maybe to talk about the Arst article. So we wouldn't be starting for 4 to
Yeah.
6 weeks at the earliest anyway. So let me just read
Okay.
a couple more responses. Refined Hayseed says, I've been allowed great liberty here. Words fail. The Invisible Man, can you? Okay, he asked for the reading. Refined says, fresh flowers in the belly of the frozen mammoth. Cherie says, so if we don't change now, we'll still be barbarians, be barbarians tomorrow or 1,000 tomorrows. And so one then asks, can one person's transportation affect the world, change, and see what happens? And I would say, what Margaret Mead said, which is that there's just no doubt that a small group of people can change the world because it's the only thing that ever has. And
It is. And if you get the people who are healthy and stand up, they say, no, I'm going to call BS and I'm going to do something about it. So I think if I take Refined Hayseed's name and that wonderful last comment, instead of disparaging barbarians, why don't we be refined barbarians? Because they're connected to nature. And so what
right,
happens is then you're not afraid of conflict. But what I find at is then you're schooled in it. And so you have less of it because
right,
people don't posture because they know the consequences. And instead of violence, because to me, violence is kind of petty.
right.
And
And
And actually, the metaphor, the old Zen cartoon, the samurai
Right.
sitting down,
Hmm.
and he says, "Man who have mosquito land on testicles, learn very quickly. Violence not best first course of action."
Oh, that's really bad.
Maybe
Well,
the second
I
place
have to say
first.
that, we have to transform as human beings.
Yeah,
There are a lot of us, 8.5 billion of us or so, something like that right now. And some of us can transform. I have seen and have experienced personally that, a few people can do something online and it can change a whole nation or a whole world.
yeah,
And but uh, it changes in unexpected ways.
right.
And I don't even know the consequences of some of the things that I've seen happen, but I do know that um, that some of the things that I've done online have changed the world. Whether whether anybody else believes that or not, I don't really care, but I know what I saw.
Right.
Okay. And so I have been active on social networking for about 15 years now. I met my wife online in 1985, and we claim that we're the first couple to meet online and marry, and nobody has ever debated me on this point. And so I think it's very likely true. Um, and so if you do know somebody else that met online and married before August 22nd, 1985, which is when we met, then let me know because I'd like to know about that couple, um, especially if they're still married, which we are. And then so we are transforming, and it is possible to transform. And the transformation, it seems to me, is for us to realize that we're not, that when we pray or when we meditate, we're not seeking help from some outside force. Okay, Christ didn't die to give everybody a get out of jail free card. All right. And um, what Christ showed us, which Jung points out to us, and probably you'll never hear from the pulpit, is that life is suffering. Okay, we all suffer in one way or another, and we all live in duality, and we have to embrace the duality and decide how we're going to live our lives going forward, embracing the duality. And it seems to me that's what Jung did with his healing, which was to point out the archetypes and point out the duality within the archetypes. And as he said, there's no cure for neurosis. Okay, there's no cure for neurosis. There's probably no cure for schizophrenia. Um, but we can learn to deal with it. In the case of neurosis, we learn to draw corral around our neurosis and live with it. And when it comes up, we say, "Oh yeah, that's my neurosis there. I better change the way I behave." And
Become a docent. Here, over here, we have the natural habitat of
right,
Jordan's trigger.
and if we're schizophrenic, then we have um, medications which help us not behave in inappropriate ways. If we have a mental disease or defect in the form of schizophrenia, then we probably need that help. Um, but we know to go do that. So,
Or work on better nutrition so that big food doesn't support big pharma and back and forth.
right. And Cherie says, have a wonderful day, everyone, as our world bears wide open with our eyes awake, with hearts breaking. The ending of violence is the ending of time. Um, and Sheree says, "How lovely, Skip." And amen, amen. So this completes our reading and commentary on the Red Book. And if you came in late and you would like to read more or hear more, then go back to this to the what is it, the playlist on the Red Book, and you can hear it from the beginning, and to hear our commentary from the
Thank you, everybody.
and Refine says, okay, so Refined Hayseed says that's what Jung did, showed me a way out of mental neurosis. I was trapped. I learned to live with it. Yeah, and you know, he's probably shown me that same way. Anyway, peace, everyone.
All
Take
right.
care. Oh, wait a minute. Cherie says, Skip, did you hear the one about the Pollock painting being stolen with a, a base with a baseball jewels? Do you understand that?
The Pollock painting.
Pollock painting being stolen with a baseball jewels. I'm sorry, I don't know. I haven't
Is it
Cherie.
a Pollock painting or a Pollock, like a Polish?
Oh, Pollock painting. Yeah, a
A
Pollock
Pollock
painting
with baseball jewels?
with a baseball jewels. I don't know what that is. Um,
Is that just a surrealist aphorism gibberish? That the joke is actually the statement? I mean,
maybe I
I,
don't know. Cherie
I
will
don't
have
know.
to
I mean,
tell
it's
us.
that it could be. It could be. It could be that that's kind of like Andre Breton, or actually, what Andre
Okay, I'm
Breton.
sorry. I read it as a joke because I misread what Sherry said. What Sherry actually said was, Skip, did you hear that one about the Pollock painting being stolen with a baseball jewels? Sorry, I haven't heard that one.
Oh, so okay, no, from a museum, a Pollock painting and jewels of baseball memorabilia were probably stolen at the same time. But no, I
Okay.
haven't heard about that.
Yeah, the only trouble with stealing a painting is you can never show it to someone, to anyone else. Uh, and she says, of the great rings of the NYC's players. Okay.
Oh, right, there were it was there
Okay.
were
So Pollock
championship
painting
there
was,
were championship like World Series rings that
I
were
see, were stolen along with the
out.
Pollock. Oh, interesting, interesting. Um,
And what's funny is the person may have stolen the rings, knowing what they were, and stolen the Pollock just because, and then goes tries to hawk it and goes, "When sorry, we're not going to give you 70 million. We're going to give you a penitentiary."
right. And yeah, that's the problem with having a stolen painting, which is you can enjoy it for yourself, and we can hope that it's worth 70 million to you for that. But you can never show it to anybody because if you do, then you also go to jail.
Well, yeah.
Right. And the same with the the championship rings. Um, you could melt them down for gold, I suppose, which I doubt if they have much gold actually in them. Uh, but
That's I read an art. That's where I remembered. I read an article that the from the daughter of actually I think it was Yogi Berra's daughter
uh,
and or granddaughter, and she said maybe there was $80,000 of gold melted down, and the jewels dispersed. And she said it's just diamond sapphires or what have you, but that there was the sentimental historic value that was almost immeasurable, and
yeah,
so that pennies on the dollar, people are just smelting
right.
history.
So yeah, that's right. Uh, get the pog back, the rings you can't. They were melted down. I see. Okay, well, um, it would be great to get the pollock back, obviously, um, because
I could burn it, put it back into the worm.
everybody knows uh, my love of pollock's work now.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay, goodbye, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Sounds good.